for 45 agonizing minutes. I sat on a rigid, uncomfortable leather bench outside the executive suite, watching the digital clock on the wall tick away my dignity. Second by second, my name is Harper. I am a 35-year-old black woman who spent the last decade building the entire back-end compliance architecture for Meridian Tech. I sacrificed my late 20s and early 30s for this corporation. I missed my younger sister's wedding rehearsal to push a critical server update. I coded through 3 separate bouts of the flu, running on black coffee and adrenaline, just to ensure our federal government contracts never slip past their deadlines. Yet, at 4:00 p.m. on a gloomy Friday afternoon, I was explicitly told by a junior assistant to wait outside the frosted glass doors of my own department while our newly appointed vice president, Sterling Price, held court inside. Sterling was a textbook corporate import. He wore custom-tailored Italian suits, sported flawlessly manicured hair, and possessed a resume built entirely on stripping down companies and laying off the actual talent to artificially boost quarterly margins. He had been with Meridian for exactly 3 weeks and had never once asked to see the server architecture. Through the frosted glass, I could see his silhouette pacing back and forth, gesturing wildly to Patricia, the head of human resources. They were deciding my fate, and they deliberately wanted me to feel the anxiety of the wait. It is a classic, deeply manipulative psychological tactic in corporate America. Make the loyal employee feel incredibly small and powerless before you deliver the final blow, ensuring they are too disoriented to fight back. But as I sat there, tracing the edge of my leather notebook, the anxiety completely faded, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. As a black woman navigating the tech industry, I had learned very early in my career that professional respect is rarely freely given. It must be legally bound and enforced. I knew exactly what was happening. Our latest quarterly earnings had missed Wall Street's expectations, and Sterling needed to show the board of directors that he was aggressively trimming the fat. My senior-level salary, inflated by a decade of well-earned performance bonuses, was a prime target. What arrogant men like Sterling didn't know was that my original employment contract, drafted back when Meridian was desperate for my specialized skills, contained specific clauses he hadn't bothered to read. When the door finally opened, I walked in ready for war. The atmosphere inside Sterling's corner office was intentionally sterile and intimidating. Sterling sat comfortably behind his massive mahogany desk, tapping a gold pen, while Patricia from HR occupied the corner chair, her eyes fixed firmly on her tablet to avoid any human connection. Neither of them offered me a glass of water. Neither of them engaged in the usual corporate small talk, without a word of greeting. Sterling pushed a thick manila folder across the polished wood surface. "Harper?" he began, using a tone that was aggressively gentle and entirely fake. "Meridian is pivoting toward a leaner, more agile operational framework. Unfortunately, as we streamline our overall tech architecture, your specific managerial role is becoming completely redundant." Redundant. That was the sanitized, legally approved corporate buzzword for throwing a human being away. I didn't immediately reach for the folder. I just looked at him, letting the silence stretch. "Redundant," I echoed softly, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I am the sole active administrator for the Aegis Protocol. Our major government clients, including the Department of Defense, route their highly classified data through a localized cryptographic bridge I personally built. There is no automated redundancy for that system. It requires manual oversight." Sterling offered a deeply condescending smile, the kind reserved for naive children. "We have secured a highly capable offshore development team to take over the immediate transition. You'll be perfectly fine. Now, inside that folder is a standard separation agreement. We are generously offering you 4 weeks of severance pay, provided you sign the document today." 4 weeks of pay. That was the exact monetary value they placed on a decade of my absolute loyalty. Standard tech industry practice for a senior director would have been at least 12 to 16 weeks, plus extended Cobra health benefits. They were intentionally lowballing me, assuming I would panic at the sudden loss of my medical insurance and sign away my rights. "If you refuse to sign," Patricia chimed in, reading robotically from a prepared legal script, Your employment will be terminated immediately without any compensation package, as per our standard at-will employment policies. I opened the folder, glanced at the insulting number printed in bold black ink, and carefully closed it. They expected me to argue, to cry, or to beg for my livelihood. Instead, I pushed the folder back across the desk. I will not be signing this document. Sterling, I said calmly, I will draft my own response. Sterling actually chuckled, leaning back in his expensive leather executive chair and crossing his arms. Suit yourself, Harper, but I need to be absolutely clear by 5:00 p.m. today. Your building access and system badges will be permanently deactivated, regardless of what you choose to write. He genuinely thought he had won the negotiation by utilizing brute force. I stood up, gave Patricia a brief, pitying nod, and walked back to my desk, my mind operating like a highly efficient, well-oiled algorithm. The open plan office around me was quiet, completely oblivious to the fact that its digital heart was about to be forcibly ripped out by a man who didn't understand code. I didn't waste any precious time packing up my coffee mugs, my framed photos, or the decorative plants on my desk. Those were acceptable casualties of war. I logged into my terminal, pulled up my personal encrypted drive, and opened a specific legal document I had drafted alongside my employment attorney 3 months ago. The exact moment the rumors of a corporate restructuring had started circulating. The letter I printed on an unofficial company letterhead was exactly 1 paragraph long. It contained no anger, no defense of my character, and no emotional plea for my job. It stated, simply and legally, per the strict change in control stipulations of my 2018 executive retention contract, my resignation will be considered conditionally effective only upon the company's full fulfillment of the accelerated vesting of all equity, the payout of my accrued bonuses, and a minimum 12-month severance, totaling $450,000. Until these contractual financial obligations are explicitly met, my employment status remains active, and I remain on the payroll. I signed the document in blue ink to prove it was an original. At 4:45 p.m., I walked into the HR department and handed the single sheet of paper to Patricia. She barely glanced at it, seeing the word resignation at the top and immediately assuming I had caved to the immense pressure. We'll process the 4 weeks of pay on the next cycle, Harper, she mumbled, clearly eager to end the uncomfortable interaction and start her weekend. Read the entire document, Patricia, I replied quietly, leaning in just slightly. And make absolutely sure the corporate legal team sees it before Monday morning. I turned and walked out of the building. Feeling the cool evening air hit my face. They thought they had fired me cheaply. They had no idea they had just armed a massive digital landmine. Saturday morning was breathtakingly beautiful. I deliberately left my corporate smartphone in the glove compartment of my sedan. Completely disconnecting myself from the digital world, I spent the morning repotting my indoor plants, listening to vintage jazz on vinyl, and drinking expensive loose-leaf tea. I knew exactly what was happening at the Meridian Tech server farms, even without looking at a single screen. The Aegis protocol wasn't just a standard piece of software. It was a highly complex FedRAMP-compliant security bridge. Every Saturday night at exactly midnight, the protocol initiated a mandatory, heavily encrypted, cryptographic handshake with our federal clients' mainframe servers to verify data integrity. Crucially, because of the strict government security clearances required, this handshake could not be fully automated. It required a manual two-factor authorization token from the lead system architect. I was the lead system architect. My security credentials had been aggressively and permanently revoked by Sterling Price at exactly 5:00 p.m. on Friday. When Sunday afternoon finally rolled around, I retrieved my phone from the car just to check the battery life. The screen lit up instantly, displaying a chaotic wall of notifications. There were 47 missed calls. 12 were from Sterling, his texts becoming increasingly frantic and demanding. 15 were from the offshore IT team in Bangalore, who were desperately trying to understand a system they had never been properly trained on. Harper, pick up the phone immediately. Where are the master cryptographic keys for Aegis? Read one text from Sterling. Sent at 2:00 a.m. Harper, this isn't a joke. The federal portal is rejecting our sync. We are facing severe compliance breaches. Call me back right now. Read another. I smiled warmly, locking the screen and tossing the phone onto my kitchen counter. They had locked me out. They had terminated my access against my will. I was simply complying with their direct managerial orders. If they couldn't run their own multi-million-dollar infrastructure without me, that was a catastrophic failure of leadership, not an employee revolt. The absolute arrogance of modern executives is assuming that back-end infrastructure runs on magic and corporate buzzwords. Monday morning was going to be an absolute bloodbath for Meridian, and I intended to enjoy every single moment of my legally accrued paid time off. By Tuesday morning, the internal panic had escalated rapidly from the departmental level to the corporate stratosphere. The Aegis protocol had been completely dark for 48 hours. Major federal clients, including key divisions of the Department of Defense as well, were receiving automated security failure notices and threatening to pull their massive contracts. I was sitting at a local artisanal coffee shop, enjoying a warm almond croissant, when my personal cell phone rang. It wasn't Sterling. It was Arthur Thorne, the formidable general counsel for Meridian's parent company, headquartered in New York. Men like Arthur Thorne do not make personal phone calls to mid-level engineering directors unless millions of dollars in corporate value are actively evaporating. Harper, Arthur's voice was incredibly smooth, calculated, but laced with an undeniable underlying tension. We seem to have encountered a severe miscommunication regarding your transition process on Friday. We need you to log in remotely, right now, and bypass the Aegis security lock. I took a slow, almost deliberate sip of my latte, savoring the rich flavor. Good morning. Arthur, I'm afraid I cannot legally do that. Vice President Sterling Price explicitly revoked all my system credentials and building access on Friday afternoon. Furthermore, I am currently utilizing my accrued paid time off. There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the line. Arthur was a seasoned corporate lawyer. He immediately recognized the sophisticated legal trap his executives had stumbled into. Harper, the federal government is threatening to suspend our operating license by tomorrow morning if that secure bridge isn't stabilized. You are still technically an employee. You need to fix this immediately. I submitted a conditional resignation. Arthur, I replied, my tone matching his professional, icy detachment perfectly. Until the financial terms of my 2018 executive contract are honored in full, I cannot perform any duties. To do so would invalidate my legal negotiating position. I strongly suggest you speak to your HR department about the specific document they accepted. I ended the call. He needed to realize that by trying to fire me on the cheap, they had triggered a massive corporate liability. Wednesday arrived with the kind of palpable corporate desperation you can almost smell through the Wi-Fi connection. My employment attorney, a ruthless legal shark named Diane, set up a secure Zoom conference call at exactly 1:00 p.m. On the other side of the virtual screen were Arthur Thorne and the global head of human resources. Sterling Price was noticeably absent from the meeting. The parent company was already actively hiding the man who had caused this unmitigated disaster. Let's cut directly to the chase. Arthur, Diane started, not even bothering with standard professional introductions. Your newly hired VP attempted to terminate my client, offering a frankly laughable 4-week severance package. In response, my client submitted a conditional resignation explicitly based on her legally binding executive contract. Arthur adjusted his expensive designer glasses, looking exhausted and cornered. We reject the premise of that specific contract being active. Diane. Harper's role was officially eliminated due to restructuring. Diane smiled, a terrifying, predatory smile that she charged $800 an hour for. You didn't eliminate her role. Arthur, you foolishly assigned it to an offshore team who clearly cannot execute the basic functions of the job. Furthermore, by stripping her of her access credentials and locking her out of the building while she offered to remain conditionally employed. You have committed textbook constructive dismissal under state labor laws. You fired her without cause. The head of HR desperately tried to interject. She is maliciously holding critical company infrastructure hostage. Diane cut her off instantly, her voice cracking like a whip. She is locked out. She couldn't fix your failing servers right now, even if she wanted to. You aggressively took her keys, accepted her letter, And now your corporate house is burning down. My client is legally entitled to her full accelerated equity vest, all unutilized performance bonuses, and 12 months of executive severance. The total demand is well over $450,000. That is the exact cost of your vice president's staggering arrogance. Arthur rubbed his temples forcefully. He knew Diane was entirely right. A judge would look at the timeline and see a blatant violation of employment law. We need the system online today, Arthur finally muttered, conceding total defeat. Even as Arthur Thorne reluctantly agreed to begin drafting the massive settlement, the internal operational damage at Meridian was multiplying exponentially by the hour. I started receiving secure text messages via Signal from former colleagues who were watching the absolute chaos unfold from their cubicles. Marcus, a brilliant senior engineer who had always treated me with genuine respect and professionalism, gave me the real-time play-by-play of the disaster. It's a complete and total meltdown. Marcus texted at 3:00 p.m. on Thursday. The DoD has formally issued a breach of contract warning. Sterling is literally screaming at the database engineers in the main hallway, demanding they hack into the Aegis mainframe to bypass the authorization protocols. Half the engineering team is threatening to walk out and file hostile workplace complaints. I felt a deep pang of sympathy for the hard-working engineers caught in the crossfire, but absolutely none for the executives. This is the harsh reality of the modern tech industry. Leadership often views critical infrastructure as an infinite, magical resource that just works entirely divorcing the final product from the actual human beings who maintain it late at night. Sterling had made a fatal assumption. He assumed that because I was a black woman who didn't yell in meetings or demand constant praise, I was weak and easily replaceable. He equated my quiet, meticulous professionalism with submissiveness. By 4:30 p.m., Sterling broke all legal protocols and called me himself. I let it go straight to voicemail. He left a frantic, 2-minute message that swung wildly between desperate begging and unhinged threats. Harper, you are actively destroying this company. If you don't give us the encryption keys right now, I will personally see to it that you never work in this industry again. You will be sued into absolute bankruptcy. I forwarded the volatile voicemail directly to Diane. Sterling couldn't sue me for a breach of duty. He had officially fired me and locked me out. The Cascade failure wasn't a glitch in the software. It was a profound glitch in their arrogant leadership. Friday morning dawned. It had been exactly 1 week since I was forced to sit on that humiliating leather bench outside the executive suite. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, my laptop chimed with a new, highly restricted Zoom invite. This time, the attendee list didn't just include Arthur Thorne and the HR representatives. It included Eleanor Vance, the formidable chief executive officer of Meridian's parent corporation. Eleanor rarely, if ever, dealt with day-to-day operational matters or mid-level staffing disputes. She dealt with angry shareholders, massive acquisitions, and global PR disasters. The fact that she was personally logging onto this call meant the financial bleeding had reached the absolute top of the corporate pyramid. When the camera clicked on, Eleanor looked sharp, immaculate, and utterly furious. She didn't look at Arthur. She looked directly through the screen at me. Harper, she said, her voice dropping the temperature in the virtual room by 10 degrees. I have spent the last 12 hours meticulously reviewing the Aegis architecture, your original 2018 employment contract, and the frankly embarrassing severance package my vice president attempted to force upon you. I want to formally apologize for the extreme unprofessionalism of this transition. It was a highly strategic apology, carefully designed to de-escalate a multi-million-dollar crisis. But I accepted the victory. I appreciate that acknowledgement, Eleanor, I replied smoothly. We are currently losing $100,000 a day in service-level agreement penalties with the federal government, she continued, brutally laying her cards on the table to speed up the process. Our corporate stock has dipped 2%, based purely on industry rumors of this prolonged outage. Arthur has the final settlement agreement drawn up, worth $150,000, full equity vesting. I need you to restore the Aegis Bridge the very second the ink is dry. The financial compensation is acceptable, I said, leaning closer to the camera, but my attorney has added 2 Strict, non-negotiable clauses? Arthur sighed audibly, rubbing his face. But Eleanor just narrowed her cold eyes. Go on, she prompted, ready to make a deal. Eleanor's expression tightened imperceptibly as I prepared to outline my final terms. First, a comprehensive mutual non-disparagement clause, guaranteeing absolutely no retaliation, no lawsuits, and neutral professional references in perpetuity, I stated clearly. Second, I paused, letting the heavy weight of the moment settle over the executives. I will absolutely not hand the administrative keys over to Sterling Price. He completely lacks the technical competence to maintain the bridge. And I will not have my decade of flawless engineering work destroyed by his gross negligence. I will only hand over the master system to a technical leader I trust. You do not get to dictate my executive staffing decisions. Harper, Eleanor snapped, her authoritative facade cracking slightly. I am not dictating, I replied, my voice remarkably steady, entirely unbothered by her immense corporate authority. I'm simply protecting the critical asset I built. If I hand the keys to Sterling, he will inevitably crash the system again within a month, and your legal team will find a way to blame me. I will transfer the primary architect credentials solely to Marcus Thorne, the senior engineer. He knows the system intimately. He knows the federal compliance protocols. And quite frankly, Eleanor, he should have been promoted to vice president instead of the arrogant man who just cost your shareholders millions. The virtual room was dead silent. I was a dismissed, locked-out employee leveraging a catastrophic multi-million-dollar scalar crisis to forcibly restructure their engineering department from my living room. It was audacious, and I fully knew it. But I also knew Eleanor was a ruthless pragmatist. She cared deeply about stopping the stock price bleed, not protecting Sterling's fragile ego. I watched her mute her microphone on screen, speaking rapidly and harshly to Arthur. When she finally unmuted, her face was a mask of pure corporate calculation. Sterling Price has been placed on immediate, unpaid administrative leave pending a full internal audit, Eleanor stated cleanly. Marcus will be named interim director. If you transfer the credentials to Marcus within 10 minutes, the funds will be wired. At exactly 11:45 a.m., my smartphone buzzed intensely on the kitchen counter with an urgent alert from my bank. The wire transfer had officially cleared, and $450,000 after taxes and Diane's hefty legal fees still left me with enough liquid capital to completely change the entire trajectory of my life. I didn't cheer wildly. I didn't jump up and down or open champagne. I simply felt an overwhelming sense of vindication. I opened my personal laptop, initiated a secure, encrypted line directly to Marcus, impatiently walked him through the complex two-factor authentication reset for the Aegis protocol. You are an absolute legend, Harper, Marcus whispered over the phone, the immense relief palpable in his shaky voice. The server status is completely green. The DoD just canceled their formal breach notice, and Sterling is literally being escorted out of the building by security as we speak. You earned that spot, Marcus, I told him earnestly. You hold the master keys now. Do not let them underpay you, and read every contract they give you. I closed my laptop, walked out onto my apartment balcony, and took a deep breath. The afternoon sun was warm, cutting pleasantly through the crisp autumn air. For 10 years, I had foolishly believed that blind loyalty and relentless hard work were the ultimate currency of corporate success. I was entirely wrong. Leverage, firm boundaries, and ironclad legal contracts are the only things that truly protect you in corporate America. Meridian Tech had looked at a dedicated black woman in her 30s and assumed I was just a line item they could easily erase to save a few bucks. They thought my professional silence meant submission. They learned the hard way that sometimes the quietest, most diligent people in the room are the ones holding the detonator. Today, as I run my own highly successful boutique compliance consulting firm, I teach marginalized professionals how to defend their worth. Disrespect is incredibly common in the corporate world, but it doesn't have to be free. You just have to know how to deliver the invoice.